on, everyone? Today I'm going to be doing a review on the B&G lowering springs for the Cobalt SS. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the install and then as well as my opinion on the springs themselves. So as with any other lowering spring on the Cobalts, the install is very straightforward and pretty easy to do. It's just very kind of time consuming, and you could literally do it by yourself if you wanted to, but as long as you have like the correct tools and just a buddy or two, you can get it done pretty quick. The two most difficult parts of the install are you have to remove the stabilizer end link bolt, and that's just kind of a tricky bolt to take off, so you just kind of got to work at it. And then the other thing is, this isn't really difficult, but just kind of another time consuming thing, and that is the actually, disassembling the strut, taking the spring out and swapping it in with your new spring. As long as you have the right tools like spring compressors and things like that, it'll go fairly smoothly, but it's just kind of one of those things that will just add to the install time. And it's actually something that I was fortunate enough that I didn't have to do during my install, so that helped things go a little bit smoother. But like I said, install is extremely straightforward and fairly simple to do. It just takes some time. So for the springs themselves, they are actually a really nice spring, and before getting into all the details, I'm just going to let you know that I highly recommend them. Me personally, I haven't owned this car for super long, about 2 years, and I haven't probably even driven it for a year in those 2 years that I've owned it. So when I had the car, it had blown struts, and I think the shocks might be blown in the rear as well. So the ride was definitely very harsh, especially since the Cobalt SS has the FE5 suspension. So it's already a track-tuned suspension, so you feel the bumps. And when the struts aren't working and nothing's trying to at least somewhat absorb those bumps, it's a pretty harsh ride. So the struts that I got with these springs, they actually work, and the ride is much better. The huge bumps are still going to be pretty harsh, and I think that's because of just how low the car is now, and it still has the FE5 suspension, so it's already like a stiff suspension, and odds are the really big bumps and potholes, the shocks and struts could potentially be bottoming out since they're under so much load from being lowered. These springs are the lowest springs that you can buy for a Cobalt. I'm not 100% sure on what the drop is all around, but it is about a 2-finger gap from the wheel to the fender on all 4 corners. So it's a very low and aggressive drop, and if that's what you're looking for to completely eliminate that hideous Cobalt wheel gap, these springs are definitely for you. I've already gotten a few questions, people are asking me if I was on coils. That's how low it is. So as far as in the corners, these springs actually do handle much better than the stock, as far as I've noticed. It handles much more flatter, and I definitely think that's because of the lower center of gravity. But yeah, all in all, I mean, the springs ride great, better than how my car rode before, especially since it had the blown struts. So it being lowered now and comparing that to a stock car with fully functional suspension, I would imagine that the stock would kind of handle the bumps and potholes and things like that better, since this is pretty low. But I'm really impressed with them. I highly recommend them, especially if you're wanting to go lowered. I don't know if I'd really recommend these for like a hardcore track use. I think you could go with a much better spring and shock setup for that, or even coilovers. But I do recommend these just for an improvement of handling for your everyday drive, as well as to make the car look really good. Totally gets rid of that wheel gap. The only problems that I've really had since the install of the springs is the biggest one was I was running into axle bind, which is a very common thing when you lower Cobalts to the point where the axle is kind of in a weird position and wants to bind up. So I did buy and install a part to help solve and eliminate that, which I'll do a review on here soon. So that's all taken care of. That's good. So if you do get these springs, there is a very high chance that you as well are going to run into axle bind. So I highly recommend that you buy what's called rotated transmission mounts, and that'll help kind of realign everything back together. Unfortunately, if you are thinking about installing these springs on like a base model with an automatic transmission, I'm not sure if there's a whole lot of options out there for you, since, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if anyone makes like a rotated mount for the automatic to help it with axle bind. So it's definitely some little research that you have to go on with that. The only other problem I've had with these springs is that since it's been lowered, I do have an aftermarket exhaust on this car, and now that the entire body has dropped at least 2 inches, in the rear the spring perch has been coming into contact with the exhaust pipe. Whenever I go over big bumps, it'll come up and make contact with that. There's actually a nice dent in my exhaust pipe now, so that's no fun. So I'm gonna hopefully try and work that out here in the future. Nothing that's a huge deal, but something that I did run into. So if you as well are running like a stock exhaust, or if your exhaust is, you know, kind of in an awkward position, you as well could run into some issues there with the clearance and things like that. But all in all, like I said, I'm totally in love with these springs, and install was super easy. I got to give a shout out to my friends who made this possible. And yeah, thanks for watching.